Shall we restart? All right, there we go. Hopefully it stays recording. Hi, and welcome everyone to this webinar from HL7 Australia. My name is Ruben Daniels. I'm a board director in HL7 Australia, and I'm here with Dr. Andy Bond, another board director with HL7 Australia, and we are to talk to you about the Governance and Operations Manual Implementation Plan. This webinar will be recorded and there will be time for questions at the end. Feel free to add some in the chat if you wish to do so. All right, I want to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands we're meeting on today. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present today. All right, so the agenda for today is I'll be providing an overview of what the HL7 Australia Governance and Operation Manual is. Andy will then go through the various steps in the implementation plan, and I'll finish off with the implications for projects, work groups, co-chairs, and our standard development activities going forward. As I said, at the end, we will have Q&A as well, but feel free to add your questions in the chat as they come to mind. All right, so starting off with what the GOM is, essentially it's a document that describes the rules which will underpin HL7 Australia's standards development activities. The approach of having a document like this is very much inspired by HL7 International itself, which has for a long time had and maintained their own GOM document, some of which we have tried to leverage in HL7 Australia for the past 2 years. But we reached a point in the first year of the Spark initiative, in fact, where it became increasingly apparent that we really needed our own, which took into account the specifics of the way we do things in Australia and also provides a single instrument which sets out exactly how we do things. So key parts of the document are mission and work products. It describes the technical steering committee, which we'll get into a bit more in a bit. The rules for the operation of work groups, including rules for work group co-chairs. It talks a lot about ballots and review ballots, nomination and election processes for the various types of groups involved in the standards development activities. Also rules for external engagement, including accelerators and participation in HL7 international ballots, as well as ongoing maintenance of the AU-GOM. The short link on the right there is where you can find the GOM. It'll always be published at that link, and it's at version 0.1 at the moment. I should also point out that the development and implementation of the AU-GOM is funded under the Spark-FI Accelerator Initiative. Some of you may have noticed in 2024-25, we actually did a consultation on the GOM for all our members. And following that consultation, the first version 0.1 was published on our website in May of 2025. The GOM establishes the HL7 Australia Technical Steering Committee as a new governance committee, which will oversee the standards development function instead of that being carried out by the board largely at the moment. The TSC will be responsible for product and project approvals and standards development oversight, which includes establishing and maintaining HL7 Australia's architecture, methodologies, rules, and work processes to be used by all work groups in developing our standards, ensuring that the efforts of the work groups to produce standards proceed at a pace which are consistent with agreed objectives. So functions like work group health and delivery all come under the AU-TSC. Ensuring that the work groups collaborate well and work in a consistent manner, as well as defining and overseeing ballot and distribution processes for standards. In summary, under the GOM, all standards development activities will occur in projects undertaken by work groups. Work groups will be led by co-chairs, and projects may be led by project leads and co-chairs. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Andy, who's going to talk to you about the implementation plan. If you're ready, Andy.
Thank you, Ruben. So we have had this sitting in our kind of backlog for a little while now, and have, through the HL7 Australia board, formed a team to figure out how we would go about implementing the draft AU-GOM. The group consisted of 3 board directors, me, Richard, Dixon Hughes, and Ruben, and the HL7 Australia staff, Robbie, Brett, and Nady. The target date for operationalization is the 1st of April. Yeah, that's not a joke. Yeah, it really is the 1st of April. Next slide. AU-GOM implementation plan. So the first thing we need to do is to really establish the AUTSC that is more aligned with the HL7 international kind of approach to governance, and takes away a kind of a one-stop shop that we've operated with in the past within HL7 Australia. We also need to establish kind of the foundation, the operational foundations, which really are based around work groups, governance, and making sure they all align in a consistent way with GOM. The work that is currently underway is going to transition across to this new structure. For almost everyone, it will make absolutely no difference. It's more making sure that for HL7 Australia, we can have continuity as investments in HL7 Australia standards through things like accelerators come and go over time, that we have continuity for all types of projects, that some that are community-led, some that are extraordinarily funded for faster delivery, all these kind of things. At the end of the day, they need to speak a common language and to be referenced in a consistent way, so that through the governance process, we don't end up always kind of trying to create exceptions or define new artifacts. So we through this operationalization, ensuring that there is organizational support for the GOM, making sure that we're going to have additional kind of support through co-chair handbook, which will give guidance on how co-chairs should work and operate, and ethics and code of conduct documents, which kind of mimics the kind of things they do in HL7 International. There will also be a board subcommittee to look after the GOM. This is a start of a new journey, so you will see changes over the next months and years, and we want to make sure that it stays accurate and relevant to the work that HL7 Australia and its community is doing. So it will be published as version 1.0 as opposed to the minor version that it currently sits at, and that's going to reflect implementation of our AU-GOM. So work groups are a key foundation of HL7 Australia's governance process. Work groups are kind of sub-communities that look after particular areas of focus. At the moment, we are going to have 4 work groups. We'll have the existing fire work group plus 3 additional work groups. AU Core work group, which at its outset will be looking at AU Core and AU Patient Summary. AU e-requesting, which will be looking at the piece of work previously known as e-requesting, and a new terminology work group, which will look to take care of the terminology artifacts that are relevant across all of the other work going on within HL7 AU Fire work. The technical design groups, as we currently know them, will continue to operate up until the transition point, and at that transition point, we'll then move over into this working group and project structure. To say, at its start, it will be exactly the same, slightly different names, but in terms of scope of work, it's the same. What those work groups do have a capacity for, if they so choose, they can broaden or narrow their scope of work over time. They can rename themselves, all through a standard governance process that the TSC will look after for them. On Monday, which is the Monday coming up in a few days' time, I'm going to call for nominations for co-chairs, and when we receive those nominations, so they're fire work group co-chairs and for the TSC, those nominations will then be the foundation of setting up co-chairs for these new entities. Responses will come back. If there is a need for an election, then we will begin an election process, but depending on how many people respond, we may not need that election process. And then following the appointment of the work group co-chairs, each work group needs to get together and decide which one of their co-chairs will represent that group on the TSC, the AU-TSC, and notify someone from the GOM implementation team. And by the 1st of April, some of those responsibilities from the fire work group will transition to the TSC. So rather than that fire work group being the one-stop shop for everything, we'll have the TSC doing some work. The project HL7 AU projects that are within a work group in a TDG currently, they're going to transition either to AU core or AU requesting, and they are then going to operate under the AU-GOM. AU-GOM is the rules of it are not that different from what currently happens with those TDG versions that develop standards under HL7 AU. The TDGs will cease to operate as a TDG, but will continue their work through the projects within working groups. As I say, working groups, we haven't predefined where any of these working groups are going. We've really just given a starting point, and that starting point directly maps to any of that work the TDGs are currently up to. But at the point of creation, that working group can get together and make changes in name, mission, charter, number of co-chairs, pretty much anything under the rules of the AU-GOM that they wish to do. They can leave it the same, up to them. AU Core and requesting work groups can, in theory, propose additional areas of work beyond what was in the TDGs through the Sparked Accelerator. They may just continue with that work that was in the Sparked Accelerator, whether it is accelerated or not accelerated. Not everything needs to be a fully fledged IG delivery either. You may look to create a project to investigate a particular topic of interest that there is a strong community interest in, and that the HL7A community wants to see something come from, but they're not quite sure how it's going to manifest yet. That is open for work as well. Do you want to go with this one, Ruben?
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, happy to do so. So this slide is dealing with the establishment of the technical steering committee. So in a similar time frame to the not call for nominations for the work groups, we will also be putting out a call for nominations this Monday, the 2nd of February, for 4 TSC positions which need to be elected. There are some positions which will be occupied by people in particular roles, like the HL7 Australia board member, which is the workgroup liaison officer, which is Andy at the moment, and the chair of the AFCC, which is Graham Grieve. Those roles have automatic places on the TSC, but these 4 we're calling for nominations for need to be elected, and those are the TSC chair, deputy chair, and 2 community representatives, which are effectively any HL7 Australia member. As for the work groups, elections will be arranged if we get more nominations than there are actual positions, and that election will run up until Friday, the 13th of March. Duly elected members will be notified along with the broader HL7 Australia membership by Monday, the 16th of March. A few additional steps as part of the implementation plan. The implementation team will be providing, as Andy said, organizational and technical support required by the work groups and the TSC to deliver on their functions. That includes platforms like Confluence, Zoom, GitHub, balloting through Jira, issue management, etc., and potentially also the CRM, which Robbie and others are working on in HL7 Australia. And by the 1st of April, the board will establish a board subcommittee that will be responsible for maintaining the AU-GOM going forward as specified in the AU-GOM itself. There will be regular periods under which changes will be considered and new versions of the AU-GOM published. So this diagram attempts to just provide the parts of the structure and where it is at the moment and what it's changing to. So that where we are right now is on the left. So we've got the board, we've got the AFCC, and we have just the fire work group, which has TDG subcommittees through which the Spark projects are being delivered at the moment. And of course, we have the AU-based project. These are just the standards development projects. I'm well aware that we have many other projects sitting in the fire work group and in the TDGs as well. Those will similarly move over to the work groups. So where we move it with following implementation of the AU-GOM, and by 1st of April, we will have that AU-GOM maintenance subcommittee in the board. We'll have the TSC alongside the AFCC, and the AUTSC will oversee everything carried out by the work group collective, which is just a fancy term for the collection of all our work groups. And starting off, we will have, as Andy said, the fire work group with AU base, a terminology work group with projects to be determined, an AU core work group with AU core and AU patient summary, and the AU e-requesting work group with the AU e-requesting project. So that's the structure. I'll jump into the last few slides, which are implications. So implications for work groups and project, first of all, as I said, the collection of work groups are referred to as the work group collective or the WGC. They will all be subject to the rules in the AU-GOM, including oversight by the AUTSC. All projects need to be associated with at least one work group, and projects may be led by work group co-chairs and or work group members. The TDG projects currently active, those will transition to one of the new work groups. As Andy said, the scope of the transition projects will remain unchanged during the transition, and members of existing TDG projects will be given the option to decline membership of these projects prior to the transition happening. So we will be reaching out to all of those members, and if any of them elect to not be included in the membership of the projects, once transitioned to the work groups, they'll have that option and we will not include them. The implications for co-chairs, as Andy said, the TDG co-chair role will cease once the AU-GOM becomes operational. We are encouraging all TDG co-chairs to nominate to become a co-chair of the work group responsible for the project they currently lead. Work group co-chairs will, of course, be subject to the rule and co-chair requirements in AU-GOM. The handbook will be developed to assist work group co-chairs. And as Andy pointed out, at least one co-chair just one co-chair from each work group needs to represent the work group in the AUTSC. Finally, implications for standards development. The day-to-day standards development activities like participation in meetings, connectathons, and so forth will remain largely unchanged. The fire work group will cease to be the responsible work group for fire IGs currently being developed by the TDGs. So those are AU core, AU patient summary, and AU e-requesting. Notably, issues in JIRA for those specifications will now need to be triaged to be associated with one of the new work groups and not the fire work group as is currently the case. Apart from creating new conference spaces, email lists, and work group association in JIRA, use of our tooling platforms will remain largely unchanged as well. And finally, the new HL7 Australia Ethics and Code of Conduct document will apply to all who participate in HL7 standards development activities online or in person. I think that is our presentation, so happy to go to questions, and I'm not seeing any in the chat right now unless I'm missing something. So
There
if
is
anyone...
there is no chat, Ruben.
Oh, that's great. Please raise your hand if you have a question. You will have to say it out loud.
I don't even know if that is turned on, but they're certainly coming through in Q&A.
Oh, okay. I'll go to Q&A. Okay, so the first question is,
We've
just
answered a
while
few.
you've answered.
We've answered a few, but Danielle's got a new one. Will
Okay.
TDGs have to cease as in officially issue some sort of ceasing communication? and the Confluence pages will be archived since the group isn't transitioning into a new structure.
Right. So not all of this has been worked out is the first thing that I will say. So by cease, we mean that the TDG structure, as in something into which a TDG project can go into and be led by TDG co-chairs, that sort of way of doing things is really what's ceasing here. The TDG project and its scope is not ceasing. That's being transitioned to fit into a work group so that it can fit into the AU-GOM structure. On the Confluence pages, archiving, I think that's probably appropriate for things like minutes and so forth. We can just work through the rest of it and decide what the appropriate treatment for that is. Happy to take feedback on that, Danielle. I'm going to go to Michael Osborne's question. Where might a new Spark project live, e.g. encounter record? So I think I'm going to start by saying under the Spark initiative, there are projects which HL7 Australia has a responsibility for delivering certain deliverables. If the Spark project is seeking to develop an implementation guide through HL7 Australia as an HL7 Australia standard, then it would need to live in a work group. I'm going to Danielle's next question. Totally agree about the projects. These have always been HL7 AU projects. I'm more talking about group administration and the GOM on when you finish a group versus change a group. So the GOM doesn't really, and actually there isn't any particular governance instrument that actually defines what a TDG is at the moment. This is part of the reason we wanted to clarify a lot of these things with the AU-GOM. So I think maybe the correct treatment for this on how the TDG group administration in relation to how it ceases ends is probably a discussion that we would have with our partners in the Spark initiative. Any other questions? Danielle has a follow-up. As an example, if the AU Core TDG is now the project, does that get rebranded as AU Core project? AU Core workgroup then as a new stream, with the intention be that the AU Core TDG membership from both the AU Core project membership as well as the AU workgroup membership. Okay, a few things there. So on the project side, my understanding is that membership is at the project level, not at a TDG as a whole level. And please correct me if I'm wrong about that, Danielle. We will be doing the same with the implication that membership of a workgroup project implies membership of the workgroup. As for the titles and naming of the projects, they will remain as is unless the workgroup and project decide to change them. AU Core workgroup would then be a new stream. So not exactly sure what that question means, but a workgroup is really a construct in which projects can live and which a domain of activity can be administered by co-chairs. So I think a workgroup project is probably closer to what a work stream is, I would suggest. And in terms of the intention that the AU Core TDG membership would form both the AU Core project membership as well as the AU Core workgroup membership. I think I kind of spoke to that one before. The current AU Core TDG membership is, I guess, partially in the AU Core Fire IG project and the AU Core AU Patient Summary membership. Each of those will retain those memberships within the project, and by implication, if you're a member of an AU Core Workgroup project, you are a member of the AU Core Workgroup. And thanks for clarifying. That was Jai, not you, Danielle. Going to the next question, will HL7 Australia be providing the same level of administrative support to the new AU workgroups and projects as Spark is currently providing? The answer to that is HL7 Australia in terms of technical support and so forth, for all work groups and projects, I think will remain the same. I think where differences may be is the nature of the acceleration required by the Sparked initiative around timeframes, events, and so forth. But I might hand to Andy to see if you'd like to add anything to that one, Andy.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think the reality of that is no, that it was never the intent within kind of HL7 Australia that every HL7 Australia project would have the resourcing of an accelerated project. We just don't have those funds. Um, where there is extraordinary funding applied through Sparked or through another accelerator that decides that there is an intense interest in a piece of work and they want to see it done in a quick time frame, then they could certainly work with HL7 Australia to create an accelerator to fund support and stuff. And we're talking about groups now to support projects in that guise. But what we will always support is a baseline set of H7 Australia project support, which is where the community, without extraordinary funding, on a volunteer basis wants to progress something, then there's a base level of H7 Australia support to do it. It will never be, unless we win lotto, it will never be at the level of accelerator funding um, uh, from HL7 Australia. But I think it's fair to say HL7 um, uh, would love to talk to accelerator funders who want to accelerate a piece of work or multiple pieces of work. Uh, the only thing that this structure requires is that when we do so, that the artifacts of governance from an HL7 Australia standards perspective, which is working groups, the TSC, and the projects, those are the slots we have to fill. If someone wants to come and go, we are going to provide extraordinary secretariat support for a particular project under, let's say, AU Core working group, and the we will also help author the implementation guide if that was an outcome that was looking to be achieved, then that would be great. The only kind of caveat to that is, of course, any kind of accelerated process by being within the HL7 Australia Working Group project family is subject to the consensus and open, transparent processes of standards development that is the bread and butter of HL7 Australia. I hope that very long-winded way says or gives you an answer.
Thanks, Andy. Brett's been waiting patiently with his hand up.
Oh
Over to
yeah,
you, Brett.
I just want to make sure people know too that like I mean the existing Spark projects continue, the ones that are Spark projects, so they will operate within the work group as Spark projects with that support from the accelerator anyway. So that's not going away, just because it's called a work group. And I think too, like there are specific roles in each in fire IG projects where you have a fire IG facilitator. Co-chairs do a lot of heavy lifting around managing and coordinating. And so yeah, and the other secretariat kind of roles as well can be filled by anyone. And so at the moment we have had Sparked supplying fire IG facilitators and secretariat kind of support. But that's only on specific projects. So we need organisations that care about those projects to fill those roles and make things happen. Yeah.
Thank you, Brett. I've got a question from an anonymous attendee. Can you comment on the relationship between the CDG and the new TDGs? Do the TDGs no longer have the mandate to work closely and implement the guidance of the CDG? So a few things to say here. First of all, there are not new TDGs. Under the AU-GOM, there are no TDGs. The current TDG run projects like AU Core and AU Patient Summary, which are part of the Sparked initiative, will continue to have a close association with the Spark CDG. So that is definitely still business as usual. On the second part, the TDGs no longer have the mandate to work closely and implement the guidance of the CDGs. As I said, if the project is associated with a Spark initiative, then it will certainly work closely and implement the guidance of the CDG as is currently being done. Another anonymous attendee asks, will HL7 Australia membership be a prerequisite to continue to participate in the relevant groups? So first of all, participation is generally open to anyone to attend meetings, to raise comments and issues about specs. Membership comes into play if you are seeking to participate in a ballot of one of these specifications, or if you're seeking one of the leadership roles like a co-chair. Beyond those, anyone is free to participate. Ricardo asks, will there be a regular monitoring of calendar workload by the TSC as potentially more work groups get established? Workgroup health is absolutely one of the functions of the TSC. And I would suggest that it would include ensuring that calendars are appropriate, there aren't conflicts and so forth. Basically ensuring all the work groups are delivering well on various fronts is definitely in scope for the TSC. As you're aware, a lot of people participate in different work groups, and it would be good to ensure cadence of meetings is carefully planned. Completely agree, Ricardo. Any other questions? Seeing anything? All right. Well, if there are no other questions, then all that's left is for the implementation team and the board to all thank you for attending and giving up some time on your Friday afternoon. It's greatly appreciated. As I said, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available to everyone. So please do let your colleagues know. And if there are any questions that come around or that come to mind or from colleagues, please let them know that they can get in touch with any member of the implementation team or through the HL7 Australia default email address. All right. Thank you all and have a good weekend.